is uh, the it's kind of the sense I have of that's finally crystallized and precipitated and come out of a kind of an initial chaos into finally something I've written down. You know, I can make it very explicit and so on. And the feeling of one way of saying it is as if this were the beginning of a new century rather than the end of the regular century. And as if an old kind of life were dying and a new kind of life were beginning, and a new kind of philosophy, and in essence a new age. For me it was starting in psychology, and then just sort of in the last couple of years realizing that that was just a local arena, and that the same kind of struggle that was going on inside my skin was a sort of a zeitgeist thing, and was going on in an awful lot of other skins too. Now I feel confident as I did not 10 years ago. We have a new image of man, we have a new image of society, and those I think I'd place first. And then out of this we have a new image of religion. That's a real revolution. I feel more grandiose than I did then, because now I think I'd call it the basis for universalism. That is, if we agree that our most urgent problems are the big problems are the good society, and that's in capitals, and then the good man, and that's in capitals also, and then the interrelations between them. Then if we recognize that the good society now has to be one world, it just has to be, or it won't work, the nationalism is dead, although it doesn't know it yet. And the good man has to be a member of a species, and he has to know that too. God, I get scared by it sometimes. You know, it's this thing about weaving together of Marx and Galileo and Freud and Socrates and Adler and Spinoza and Aristotle. It's just, sometimes I just can't believe it. Well, at the back of my head, I still think of good and evil, and of good guys and bad guys, and of, therefore, of friends and enemies, allies, and so on. But I don't say that in public very much because it gets misunderstood. But of thinking now that American intellectual and political life and social life is too much run by people in this bad camp, that is the anti-life people, death wishers, destructive people, people who are nihilistic and cynical about human nature, and people who ultimately really don't believe in the possibility of good. The two questions there is, how good a society does human nature make possible? No. Was that, how good a society does human nature permit? And then, the other one, that's how good a human nature does society permit? And these two questions, that's what we talk about, and that's very practical.
There are two things I wanted to explore with you, Abe, on this. First of all, I suspect you've always been unafraid to say things. Now, that may be called arrogance, and when you're young, I suppose it's called brash. But you've always been able to say things, haven't you?
Well, that's just not so. I did say them, And always I was scared to death.
Really?
Until recently. I've learned not to. Well, even now I'm scared. Last night I had the dream. It was a dream about our talking before the cameras this morning.
Yeah.
And the dream was the simplest, most obvious kind of dream. There I was talking to a huge audience. It was in the classroom, but it seemed endless. There were thousands of people, and I, as usual, I came late. And then I stumbled down, they crowded, everybody was sitting on the stairs, and I stumbled along there. And then I came to the front of the class and said, "My God, what is this? I don't know what the subject of the class is." And I had to ask them, you know, what is the name of this class? What are we supposed to talk about here? And then at that moment I said, well, the best reading is this Toward the Psychology of Being. One thing I don't think I've ever confessed to anybody, maybe this is the moment for it. After you face death, then you give up modesty and stuff like that. I mean, you're regarded as sort of crap and politeness and that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, the thing that my private secret has been that the way in which I try to keep a good style of writing and also thinking and also to avoid crap was to speak over the heads of the audience to my own private audience, the people I wrote for, the people I loved most, and I always had them in mind.
You do
Thomas,
people?
that's right, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Socrates, Spinoza, whom especially I love,
Yeah.
Bergson,
Yes.
very fond of that kind of person, and it would be different depending on what I was writing.
Yes.
And then actually reading out loud, which is a way of improving your style, you know, so because your ear is sensitive about phoniness, so that I think this would be quotes, arrogance, close quote. This would be one kind of way of trying very, very hard to keep out of the journalistic world and in the eternal world and in the long tradition, thinking of my great-great-grandchildren rather than just of what's in the papers today. And I guess this is partly also the Jewish tradition. You know, that's a long tradition. Oh, and another part of it was, gee, this too I've never confessed to anybody. So I get sort of shy about it. That when I came from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, where I'd done my graduate studies, and came to E.L. Thorndike at Columbia to be he rescued me in the Depression. He ran me through a whole series of his intelligence tests, and I shot the ceiling off them, you know, and so on. And then he called me into his office and told me this. Now, as the shy young kid, I had always felt feelings of inferiority about my intelligence, about everything else too, you know, just general feelings of inferiority. And this man called me in and told me how smart I was. And then I went off dazed, you know, and walked the streets for days and trying to assimilate this. And this has since been, ever since that time, it was kind of a support, because my tendency as the timid boy had been, if somebody contradicted me, to retreat. That, you know, I must be wrong. And slowly I learned after these, you know, after Thorndike had spoken with me, and it made me feel important because he promised to support me for the rest of my life if I couldn't get a job. And then he said, he was frank about it, he said, though I dislike your work, I was working with sex and dominance and what he thought were unpleasant subjects. He says, even though I dislike your work, if I cannot trust my own intelligence tests, who could? So thereafter, if I retreated in the face of opposition, which was my way, then I go, you know, that night maybe I'd wake up in the middle of the night and say, but damn it, I'm smarter than he is. Why should I retreat? Why should I feel that he must be right and that I'm wrong?
You know, I'm just curious about, you know, how you've been able, within the framework where most professionals get socialized to the schools of graduate schools, you've been able to come out with your own ideas. Where do they come from? How do they interact? How do they develop within the framework that you've come out of in American psychology?
I've thought about this a lot because all this, you know, the forces of evil. One of the main tenets is that you're helpless before the social forces, which I think is a lot of crap. You're not. And of course, we're all testimonial to this. Well, I've had to think about it a lot. Partly is the thing of being the outsider. There's no question that this is a good thing to be. I mean, it hurts and it's very painful. And the anti-Semitism was just awful. For a kid, you know, kid can't take it. But I think the real thing is, I don't want to sound like a, well, goddammit, I do. I want to sound like a patriot. I think America is a fine culture, and I'm perpetually grateful to it. My father and mother were immigrants, and though I'm a slum boy. I was born in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, Greenpoint. It was true that most of my teachers, for instance, persecuted me the way, yeah. Well, partly this was for being Jewish, because I was the one Jewish kid in the class, maybe. But mostly it was for the kind of thing that Torrance has been writing about, and Jackson Gitzel's,
yes.
you know, the creative kid, the bright kid.
Gets punished by the teacher.
All my life long there's been an angel around. There was always an angel. If I had, on the one hand, I remember with horror my Miss Doyle, who was an awful teacher who made my life miserable for a whole semester, making fun of me and everything. On the other hand, there was Miss Griffin, who came in the next semester, maybe when I was the 5th year or 6th year or something. Then the fact was that I got a free education. A slum boy with, you know, my father was a small businessman who just barely getting enough to eat most of the time.
What did he do?
He was a barrelman, wooden barrels.
That's right. I remember that.
Now, it was perfectly true that I could go to the University of Wisconsin, and it was perfectly true also that I was greeted by anti-Semitic professors. The first speech I got was, "You should appreciate that you people are, yeah, we're taking you in here," and so on. But the fact is, they did take me in, and the fact is that it was a good school, and the fact was that my department was good to me. Any youngster who starts talking about social forces and the forces for conformity and that there are the pressures of the newspapers, and I always say, crap, why do you have to listen to them? I'm a force against conformity. There I am lecturing in my classes about how awful the television is or whatever it might be, or the newspapers, and say, am I not a force? If I recommend to you that you subscribe to Consumers Reports or to Manas, is this not social force also? So that I think it's possible for any person who has even a little bit of courage in this country. You don't have to pay for it. Eventually, virtue gets rewarded. Here I've been bucking the establishment ever since I was a kid, for the love of Pete. And what happens? I get a good job, and I I have a good salary, and I have a nice house and everything. When we talk with the kids, of course, it's easy to talk about the American nightmare. And then I say, well, sure, that's true, but in my notes I've got two columns. There's one on the left side of the page, that's the American nightmare. And God knows I could tear this whole damn culture apart with criticism. There's plenty to criticize. But on the right-hand side is the American dream. And who says that Thoreau is dead, anyhow? And Emerson is alive, and the whole political system is so wonderful that, look, if we could make a good president out of Harry Truman, we can do anything. So I think ordinary standards aren't really applicable here. For instance, I've given up lecturing.
Have you?
Pretty well. Again, simply on these grounds that I can do, the lecturing is very nice. If you're a ham, you get applause and so on and so on. It's pleasant. And it's very nice wearing your laurel leaves in public. It's pleasant. Yet I've given it up because I decided I could use my time better by being alone in my study and writing to the unseen ones who won't be applauding, but there'll be more of them. And the more of them is more important than the applause. You can pay too much for honors, you can pay too much for money, you can pay too much for fame, you can pay too much for glory, and I won't pay one damn nickel for it. That's the way it's come now.
You've been accused by some, I've never even seen it in print, but I can just imagine in psychology as overly optimistic, or bringing the soul back into psychology after we spent so many years stamping it out. But where did this come from? What about the background of your education?
I would absolutely deny that I was optimistic. What I would say was there was a huge, big, gaping hole in psychology. All the things that were important and precious, where was goodness, and where was nobility, and where was reason, and where was science, and where was loyalty, and where was courage? Well, the behaviorists had nothing to do with it, it was just nothing, because you don't find these things in white rats. That's what we lived on then. And as for Freud, Freud was a disappointed and unhappy old man. I guess maybe the cancer did it or whatever. But it didn't gel. It was wrong. And we kept on doing experiments. And then I kept on reading the literature that spelled out that, for instance, the search for knowledge is instinctoid. I did a lot of work with the choice of foods, the wisdom of the body. Well, darn it, if the wisdom of the body is the wisdom of the body, it meant human nature was wise, and human nature could pick for itself. Then when we had our babies, our babies destroyed Freud and destroyed Watson and Pavlov.
How they do that?
Well, first of all, they were so different. As anybody with more than one baby has, they're terribly different. So constitution, temperament, something like instinct. You can't learn everything. So learning theory was out as a full explanation. Then as for the everything coming out of childhood traumata, that was nonsense, because we had babies, one of whom was active in the womb and one of whom was passive in the womb. And that was before there were any, they hadn't read Freud yet.
I mean, I'm just curious about the way you were able to allow experience to go somehow through your cerebral apparatus, and it spoke to you. We all have had, everyone has had kids.
Yeah.
Most people have had kids. They see their kids defy Freud and Watson and anybody, you know, but you've allowed your experiences to inform you more than your teachers. You know, you haven't mentioned many of, well, there's always been the angel, but it's really, you're the angel. It is you've let your experiences talk to you.
I was a scientist when I was 4 years old, I remember, because my mother was very superstitious, and I mixed in religion with superstition. And I kept on testing her superstitions. You know, she'd say, if you don't step over the legs of your brother, because then he'll stop growing immediately. So what I did was step over the legs of the brother. And then she said, you mustn't go through a window, because then you'll grow blind.
Never heard that one.
Oh, she had lots of them. So I went through a window. And I remember testing all these things at the age of 4 and 5 and 6. Partly it comes down to just plain IQ, I think. Bright kids will do that.
The things you just told me confirm this idea, which many people don't have, you see. I mean, many people wouldn't have tested that. No, a lot of people would have gone through the window as a defiance of mother, or walk over their brother's legs, but you were already making your experiments with truth.
Yeah.
The arrogance we're talking about is the arrogance of trusting one's own senses and experience.
Yeah.
And so I think you've always had that. That hasn't just come after the heart attack.
It's
some tremendous sense
true.
of,
it's very true. But
of trusting your experience over others.
I could never figure it out. I got married over the protests of my mother, my father, and my wife, and my friends and my teachers. I still remember my professors telling me.
Is that right?
Sure. All my professors told me, for the love of Pete, you're too young. I was 19 years old. And anyway, a man of letters should never get married. And they kept on quoting Socrates and Xantippe and so on. And then I tried to figure, how did I stick to that? I really don't know. That's a puzzle, mystery. And what got me, it's more a mystery because I was so timid.
Yeah,
So shy. There was something decisive. God, when I fell in love, I just fell in love. Period. That was it.
You know, I still want to go back to your background if I can, because I'm not in a psychoanalytic way, because this isn't what we're here for, but did your family experience teach you anything about one-worldness or these ideas? What was happening that brought these ideas to you?
Well, I was absolutely...
Aside from just the IQ thing, what in the background led to this concern for actualization, for peak experiences, for the humanistic forces of good?
And maybe it was even there, to some extent, being the outside. I was isolated in my family and lived my life in libraries and with books. And the books that I grew up on were Horatio Alger and Dick Merriwell and so on. And also books which are forgotten now, the Joseph Altshuler books. I grew up on the American Revolution, you see. The American Revolution was, at the age of 8 or something, Thomas Jefferson was a hero for me and a real man. And George Washington, and I was soaked in the American Revolution. Then I read that stuff, which was very American, and about in high school, graduated suddenly in one moment. It was on a single day, too. One of my teachers there introduced me to Upton Sinclair.
Huh.
And suddenly Upton Sinclair and Norman Thomas and people like that became heroes. And thinking of socialism, which was also, by the way, the Jewish tradition, the kind of particular version of it, it was for social justice and also for the possibility of it. There was always the hope. It was never considered unrealistic to work for a better world while I was in high school. And, you know, my father and my uncle and everybody went along with it, sort of.
They did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course there'd be a better world.
If there's something I wanted to come back to in a short period of time we have left, and that is your more recent thinking about good and evil, which has always been a part of your work from the past. But say something about that, would you?
Yeah, I'd like to. I'm just frankly recruiting now because I think for young people who are looking for research gold mines, this is one. Just in the same way that you could do, I think I've demonstrated, you can do research with good people and with positive experiences and so on. And now if we raise the question about why people, you know, it's so obvious about the advantages of being good, why do they 99 out of 100 stay evil? And I've been figuring out things about, for instance, within our culture, just to make a start on this, I've figured out by observation, this is the first step, that our culture means ours, you know, Americans, but not all Americans. It means professionals and intellectuals and upper middle class and upper class workers. And that the chances are that a man who behaves badly or viciously will be punished for it within his lifetime, and the chances are, I figured out about 90%, 9 out of 10. And then if you add his children to it, and his children's children, it's practically certain that vice will be punished and evil will be paid for. Then if I get Freudian, you know, talk about the inner life and so on, as I've been doing, I'm redefining psychological success, psychological pay, psychological punishment. Then if you accept as pay and as punishment, I'd say it's fair to say anytime anybody's a bastard, he knows it. It's, you know, it's down around here. He may not know it consciously. Then if, and Freud is right here, if you recognize you're a bastard, then you make defenses against it. That means you have to make up a system of lies to convince yourself you're a nice guy. And if you make yourself a system of lies to convince yourself you're a nice guy, then the whole business of cognitive dissonance and everything all come into it, you know. You have to work up a whole way of life in order to support yourself in being a bastard. This book, it's called A System of Human Nature and of Society. It's the death-defying book. Because the day after I die, then it can be published.